So how about putting the paint on your substrate? The brush stroke is probably the single most important way that you are going to express what you want to express in your painting. There's a whole host of different types of strokes, and each one communicates a different thing. If you like, your brush stroke can be light and feathery. It can be thick. Let's get more paint on there. It can be super thick. See how thick that paint is? That's called impasto. These are the paintings of Van Gogh. He was an impasto painter. It raises up off the surface, gives a lot of texture, and it's what we use in alla prima painting. Alla prima is just wet into wet painting. That's what I'll do for my demos. You do a painting start to finish in one go. You paint wet paint over wet paint. And it's kind of fun. It's very direct, it's very quick, it's very satisfying and immediately gratifying. Other types of brush strokes. Your brush strokes can be slow and deliberate, or they can be quick and expressive. They can be pointillist. There's all sorts of ways that brush strokes can communicate what you want to communicate. One of the foundations that you need to remember is the fat over lean concept. All that means is as you layer your paintings, if you're going to build up layers of paintings, start with lean paint first. Lean paint is paint that has almost no oil in it. This is just paint for its own sake. And this is how we use our oil. So this is just direct paint right on the canvas. No oil, no thinning. You would normally think, hey, what am I gonna do with that? It's wet, I gotta wait for it to dry. Sure, you can wait for it to dry and that's perfectly fine. Or get a little oil, thin down the next color in your layer so you don't have to wait for the paint to completely dry in between layers. You can speed it up just by adding a little bit of oil to each successive layer. So the topmost layers will have the most oil and the bottommost layers will have the least. This is the lean layer, and as you add oil, it turns into the fat layer. So you want to have fat over lean, just remember that. So see, even though this is dry, I could still go on top of it and leave little marks that don't necessarily blend into the layer below it. You can add some white. Let's use some of our mixed up white that we made and create a tint. It's lighter, but it's not as intense either. And I would encourage you to consider this when you're mixing your colors. You don't necessarily mix black to make something darker, and that's something that I have to beat into my students. Sometimes if you want blue to be darker, add a little red, or add a little brown, or add something else. If you want it to be lighter, you could add yellow, or you could add a lighter version of that color. See how these layers will just lay on top of each. You can let them completely dry. I do that too. The thicker the paint, the longer it takes to dry. If you're using real thin layers, it'll dry much more quickly. By the way, if you have a palette and you've mixed up all these wonderful colors and you don't necessarily want to scrape it clean at the end of the day, you can do a couple of things to preserve this. Put a little plastic wrap over it. That will keep the air away from it and prevent it from drying so quickly. Or you can put it in the refrigerator. Cold also keeps it pliable and usable for a while. Let's see, what else was I gonna say? Painting is a real, for me at least, a meditative process. So make sure before you start painting that your mind is clear. If you need to do some little warm-up strokes, go ahead and do that. Be very purposeful with everything you do. Even if it's expressive, take some time to be as expressive as you want. It can be fluid and graceful, or it can be agitated and aggressive. But make sure you get your mind into that spot. And the best way to know whether your mind is in that meditative place, you won't know what time it is. You'll start painting and then you'll look up at the clock and 3 hours have gone by. That's when you know you're in the zone.